Book TV is on location at the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, where we're interviewing some professors who are also authors. We're now joined by Richard Ruth, who is a professor here at the Naval Academy. Professor Ruth, what do you teach?
I teach predominantly Southeast Asian history, although I do offer courses in pre-modern Asian history. Mostly I concentrate on Thailand and Vietnam.
So why is it important for students to know Southeast Asian history?
The United States is still very much engaged in that corner of the world, that we have many allies there, we have many partners that we're still working with, and many students at the Naval Academy, these midshipmen, are going to be officers who are going to go to Southeast Asia, and they're going to represent our interests there. So I think it's important for them to know Southeast Asian history, to be comfortable with the cultures, and to have some knowledge of their histories.
Well, Professor Ruth, one of our longtime allies is Thailand, and you've written a book called In Buddhist Company, Thai Soldiers in the Vietnam War. What role did the Thai military play in the Vietnam War?
Well, Thailand was actually a very close ally of the United States during the Vietnam War. That many people who are familiar with the circumstances of the Vietnam War will know that not only did Thailand send troops to fight alongside the United States and the other free world forces, but Thailand also served as a base for many of the aircraft that were flying bombing missions over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, over Laos, over South Vietnam. And so we, at the time, had built 7 air bases and developed a port there as well to facilitate the U.S. effort in the Vietnam War. And also, many American soldiers went on R&R to Bangkok and spent a lot of time there. So in terms of direct support and more peripheral support, Thailand was a close ally of the U.S. and an important part of the war effort.
Did they have soldiers? Did that country have soldiers in Vietnam?
Absolutely, and that's what I concentrate on in the book. Thailand sent some 37,000 soldiers. Half were combat soldiers, the other combat support troops to fight in South Vietnam as allies of the United States. They also sent some smaller naval units and air units, but still there were definitely combat units fighting outside of Saigon in Bien Hoa province, working with the United States, working with the South Vietnamese and the other allies, the Filipinos, South Koreans.
What about casualties to the Thai army?
The Thais took 500 plus casualties. Well, I should say 500 Thais died in South Vietnam while fighting what we call the Viet Cong in the South. And I think it's an important detail to focus on, because those who don't know the history of Thai involvement tend to dismiss them as the insulting term they sometimes use is America's mercenaries, because we paid for a lot of the military hardware and transportation and logistics and extra pay that the Thai troops received. They also tend to focus on those Thais who were engaged in kind of black market schemes. But the truth behind it all is that Thai soldiers were fighting, Thai soldiers were dying. For 4 years, Thailand was sort of carrying out their war, what they saw as their war in South Vietnam. So the casualties are something that we should keep in mind. Professor
Ruth, Thai-U.S. relations, when did they start to really gel? Because Thailand's been an ally for a long time, and they participated in the Iraq War and World War II.
Absolutely. I mean, you could date back to King Mongkut, and famous example of offering Abraham Lincoln war elephants for his troubles with the American Civil War. But definitely in the 20th century, the Thais were always a close U.S. ally. I mean, and this is intensified, or at least it's disrupted partly during the Second World War, but as soon as the Cold War gels, Thailand pretty much comes in along as a strong U.S. ally, and definitely a strong Cold War ally in terms of being an anti-communist component to this U.S. global strategy.
Why do you call it In Buddhist Company? Where did that title come from?
Well, the Thai soldiers who fought in South Vietnam saw themselves as kind of Buddhist warriors, that Buddhism informed a lot of their service. that some of this is ideological. Some of this is that they saw themselves as trying to halt communism as a kind of godless or a kind of threat to the practice of religious values or religious traditions. They saw Buddhism in some ways as under threat by communism. And some of it also has to do with Thailand and its role as being the kind of custodian of Theravada Buddhism in the world, as being the center of a very intense Buddhist tradition. Many of the Thai soldiers who fought there before leaving took oaths in front of the most sacred Buddhist image in Thailand now, what we call in English the Emerald Buddha, the Prakao image. Many of them wore Buddhist amulets, in fact, that became a kind of signature of them, especially when they came in contact with soldiers from other countries. They wore small Buddhist amulets around their neck, almost as identifying symbols. They brought Buddhist statues with them and sort of rebuilt Buddhist temples that had been wrecked or abandoned in South Vietnam because of the fighting. And I think their service was informed by Buddhist ideals, especially the Buddhist notion of metta or loving kindness or mercy. With a lot of the veterans that I talked to while I was doing my research would often invoke that concept of metta, of mercy, to describe why they were fighting and why they sympathized so much with the Vietnamese people, why they wanted to help them and protect them. So even as I think about it, their attitude toward nature and war's effect on animals and forests and people, all of that had a kind of Buddhist root to it. So in coming up with the title, I did want to focus on their own self-image as kind of Buddhist warriors, if that's not too much of a contradiction.
What role does the king play in Thailand? And if the king had said no to war, would Thailand have helped out in the Vietnam War?
Well, it's a great question because a king plays an important part not only in promoting Thailand's involvement in the war, but giving his blessing to the departing soldiers. From the earliest discussions with the United States, the present king of Thailand, King Bhumibol, is in the middle of those discussions, talking to Johnson, both in Bangkok and in Washington. But when they did start recruiting soldiers, the king made it clear that he supported the venture. He bid farewell, sponsored a lot of the celebrations that marked the departure of these troops to South Vietnam. He showed a direct personal interest in their well-being. He visited the wounded soldiers in the hospital when they came back. He presided over funeral ceremonies for them at these royal-sponsored temples. So from the very beginning, the King of Thailand was involved in this and supporting it. As to say whether he gave his blessing or not, would it still go forward, I don't know. But pretty much, it's hard to imagine without his support such a thing taking place.
Currently, what kind of relationship does the U.S. military have with the Thai military?
Well, the United States still has a very close relationship with the Royal Thai Army. This is something that hasn't changed since the Vietnam War. We have regular annual exercises with the Thais and other regional armies, but they hold them every year in Thailand. It's called Cobra Gold. And many of the Thai officers train in the United States and have contact with their American counterparts here. So that hasn't changed from the Vietnam War. I mean, there was a brief souring of Thai-U.S. Relations at the war's conclusion, but it was momentary. Most of the time we've had steadily close relationship with Thailand.
Why is this important to know about the Thai involvement in the Vietnam War?
Well, there's a couple reasons. I mean, Thailand had the third largest foreign army in South Vietnam for many of the years that the war was underway. This is after the United States and South Korea. Thailand saw this war as a direct threat to themselves. They were a regional power in a regional war. They didn't necessarily see this as America's war. They saw it as something that would directly affect them, and it did. That we at times tend to concentrate on South Vietnam, but a lot of the fighting was going on in Laos, and many of the same soldiers who fought, Thai soldiers who fought in South Vietnam, also did service fighting in Laos against the North Vietnamese. and against the Laotian communists. So I think you can't get a full view of the Vietnam